listening to Criminal Justice Insider Podcast with BABZ, RAWLS-IVY, and Jeff Grant.
Hey, Babs.
The voice of Connecticut criminal justice.
All right.
We broadcast live on WNHH Community Radio, 103.5 New Haven, and we're streaming at newhavenindependent.org, Facebook, Live, YouTube, Stream Now, Twitter, Twitch, Periscope, Smashcast, and archived on SoundCloud and on the CFOGN website. Sponsored by the Community Foundation of Greater New Haven.
Now more than ever.
Hey, Jeff.
Hey, Babs, that was the first time that you ever read the full intro. I'm very excited.
New year.
This is season 3.
Oh, my God.
Can you believe it?
Yes. And we are becoming quite known for this work now.
I'm telling you.
People are really pleased. People are starting to understand that criminal justice is not just people going to jail and coming out of jail, that there's a whole world wrapped around this thing.
You know, the new phrase for that's more sensitive than terms like felon or ex-con or even formerly incarcerated person. The new phrase, the new term is system impacted.
Oh,
I kind of like it.
System impacted.
Yeah.
All right, that's a lot. All right.
Yeah,
SI.
A formerly a system impacted filmmaker from L.A. named Ryan Lowe. He gave me the 411 on that one.
That's good. Did you have a good summer?
I had a great. I can't believe how long it's been since I've seen you.
I know. We normally see each other a couple of times, but this summer we just was.
Yeah.
We know I had a big move, so that took up all of my time and energy.
And I had grandbabies.
I know. I love seeing those pictures.
I know. Isn't that nice?
It is.
You know, I think that FaceTime is the greatest thing for grandparents and grandchildren.
Especially if they live far away.
Oh,
right?
yeah, exactly. Or whatever.
Yeah.
It allows you to, it can't be so obtrusive that you're actually in your kid's business every day. But, every day, every other day or so, you can FaceTime with the grandchildren for 5 minutes.
And they're so adorable.
Yeah.
And they're so little.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So let's shout out Andrew Kaplan.
And Lynn Springer.
Hey, y'all.
We love you both.
We love you. So Andrew and I, at the behest of and the encouragement of his mother, Mrs. Pauling.
I love her.
She is a wonderful woman.
Love her.
And I met her last year, and she had this dream of participating in some kind of father-daughter dance. That she wanted to do that because she believed in reuniting families, incarcerated parents.
Yeah.
And so when I met her, we talked about it, and I said, okay. And then right after that, we had Commissioner Cook on. And so that was my in.
Oh, yeah.
So I had been having a little conversation with him. He invited me to connect to the folks who were planning something. And so Andrew and I and Mrs. Pauling got pulled in, and they had their first ever incarcerated father family dance.
How about that?
And it was wonderful. The men decorated the gym up in Enfield.
Yeah.
And the men decorated the gym. It was 15 men and their families. And it was like prom. They had a photographer. They had a DJ.
Isn't that nice?
And Mrs. Pauling contributed to some of the fun things that the kids got to do, some of the arts and crafts activities. And one of the specific things was the kids got to make a frame for their dad. So anyway.
That's lovely. That's the first one, and it'll be a pilot for ones to come, I imagine.
Yes.
Oh yeah, that's great.
So we're back for our 3rd season, and we have Khalil Cumberbatch on. Do we want to pull him up? So Khalil, hold on a second while I sing your praises. This is Babs.
Hey, Khalil.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Khalil currently serves as chief strategist at New Yorkers United for Justice, a coalition of broad and diverse organizations whose goal is to pass criminal justice reform legislation in New York State. He previously served as Associate Vice President of Policy at the Fortune Society, a reentry organization whose goal is to build people and not prisons. He is also a lecturer at Columbia University School of Social Work. Hey, Khalil, that is my youngest son's name, by the way.
Oh, wow.
Great. It's a great name.
I'm in good company.
Yes, his father, my ex-husband, is Muslim, and that is his Muslim name. So you are in. That is a beautiful name.
And
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for the humbling introduction.
yeah, and left out of this introduction, Khalil, was the wonderful work you did at Just Leadership USA as well, which is where you and I first met, actually.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, and good morning to you, Jeff, and good morning to the listeners.
Hey, Khalil, where are you right now? Where are you sitting?
I'm in New York City,
Mhm.
and we are a brand new organization. New Yorkers United for Justice is a brand new organization, so we don't have a brick and mortar space as the non-for-profit business goes.
Uh-huh.
There are other priorities when you're raising money and trying to execute a campaign. And office space, unfortunately, just does not make it to the top of that list.
Sure.
And not in New York, I suspect.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah,
New York City, a 200 square foot office space could run you in the thousands of dollars depending on where it is in the city.
easily.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
well, I'm impressed you made that decision, actually, because there's way too many nonprofits who come into the space that will spend out donated money very quickly, and then they wonder why at the end of a year they've run out of money for not making prudent decisions that are dedicated, just to the mission. So I think it's a great decision.
So tell us about New Yorkers United. What is the goal, Khalil?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so first of all, New York State has one of the highest. Actually, it has the second highest level of recidivism in the states across the country. Many people, when they think of New York State, they think of a very liberal, progressive state. But the reality is that our policies, not only as it relates to the criminal justice system, other systems as well, actually don't, lead us to be as progressive as we would like to think. And the criminal justice system is just one of those examples. And the having the second highest recidivism rate is an example. Is proof of how anti-progressive our policies actually are as it relates to one portion of the criminal justice system, which is parole. And so, New Yorkers United for Justice was founded to help pass law that would help to correct the current status of the criminal justice system. And the reason why we are focusing on passing legislation is because we believe that you can change the hearts and minds all you want of people, but unless we actually change policies, laws, rules, and regulations that control, govern, and dictate the outcome of people once they're in the criminal justice system, we won't get anywhere. And so NYUJ's sole purpose is to help pass legislation in New York State that would help to put us back on a trajectory that is in line with our values that we say we hold as a progressive state.
And your partner in this is Topeka, right?
Yeah, Topeka Sam is our senior advisor, and Topeka is a formerly incarcerated woman.
We know her very well. We love her. We know her. I'm friends with her, and I love when she says nothing for us without us.
She was on the Today Show yesterday.
I saw her.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, she did the Today Show and the CNN show.
I see her. I see her out there.
Just a regular day in the life of Topeka Case.
Yeah, she's media heavy.
Yes. So now, Khalil, would you say that you're doing this work? Is this because you came through Just Leadership? Because everyone that I seem to know that come out of Just Leadership go on to do these huge, sweeping things.
Yeah, I mean if this was a class in epidemiology, right? And the purpose of epidemiology is to find ground zero, right? Or patient zero. If we were studying the field of criminal justice reform, Just Leadership USA, including the Leading with Conviction year-long training, would be ground zero, right? And it's not a coincidence that folks who are all across this country doing work around reforming the criminal justice system, whether it's local, state, or federal, that they all have this common denominator, which is the Leading with Conviction training.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, what Just Leadership as an organization did, what Glenn's vision did, is that it essentially showed the field of criminal justice reform, but more importantly, it showed formerly incarcerated people that we deserved to ask for and to seek the things that we wanted to in life, despite the fact that we had a criminal conviction.
Khalil, are you on
And
speakerphone? Excuse me, because our engineer is like flagging us. Are you on speakerphone?
No.
Okay. So, because we're just trying to get the sound quality to be the very
I hear
best.
I hear him loud. Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
Yep.
we want this to be the best podcast we can. And so technical stuff jumps in every now and again. So I'm sorry. Continue.
So yeah, I was just saying that, you know, what Just Leadership did was it just empowered formerly incarcerated people on a entirely different level. I mean, if you look at the field of criminal justice reform prior to Just Leadership's kind of culmination of the first Leading with Conviction training group, you know, it was a field that was, for the most part, propped up by exceptionalism. They sought out a handful, if that, of formerly incarcerated people and exceptionalized them to the point where they were the ones speaking on behalf of everyone in the field.
Yeah.
And we all know what kind of, you know, how problematic that can be, right? A man being formerly incarcerated, returning to a major metropolitan city, can't talk about reentry for another man who is not returning to a major metropolitan city. And men can't speak for women's experiences and vice versa. And so that in and itself was problematic. And what Just Leadership did was to essentially say, we're going to widen the pool of people who have the same lived experience being formerly incarcerated, but give them the tools that they need to actually become the leaders that they were meant to be. And that's communications training, leadership development, peer coaching, having access to one of the most amazing leadership trainers in the country for an entire year.
David Mensa, right?
To an alumni.
David Mensa, right?
David Mensa.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah,
and then after that, having access to an entire alumni network that spans everywhere from Alaska all the way down to Florida.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about your story. Are you in the mood to share a little bit of your story?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Always.
Go for it.
And I say that, not being narcissistic.
Well, you know why I asked this, Khalil, because all of us that are sitting in this space right now, we have incarceration in our background, and I'm always struck by, when do we stop saying it? Like, or do we lead with that? Do we not lead with that? I mean, it's natural in this space because this space is about that, about all of that. But I'm always thinking about when I'm in the group of folks who are doing this work, and we are all trying to sort of show the world that people who are formerly incarcerated can be productive, caring citizens of this country and of this world. But that's a lot of weight to carry all the time, maybe. I don't know. So I'm always interested in people's stories, and when do you feel like enough?
Liberated.
Yes.
Liberated.
I mean, I feel liberated, but I feel still compelled to tell my story when I'm in the spaces that warrants it. I don't lead with it all the time, but when it warrants it, I do. So I'm just interested in that.
Yeah. So, I mean, just to speak to that, I mean, you know, even now in my career, that's something that I always question. You know, how do I lead with my incarceration? When do I lead with it? Why do I lead with it? And you're right. Like, at a certain point in your life, let alone your career, you want to be able to just lead with other things and not always feel necessary to lead with your incarceration. And I think that, you know, speaking very briefly again to the Just Leadership experience, that was one of the things that came out of that was, you know, how do you tell your story in a way that, you know, doesn't always lead with your incarceration? You know, how do you talk about, in my specific case, being a husband, being a father, being a son, you know, someone who, you know, was raised in a single parent household, and what that experience was like.
Yeah.
Growing up in a very tough neighborhood in New York City, Southside Jamaica, Queens, and how all of those experiences lent to my ultimate kind of road to incarceration. But you're right. Sometimes I step into spaces and I say to myself, is this the appropriate space to lead with my incarceration?
Yeah.
And the more that I do this work, that I realize that although you may feel the gut reaction to lead with that, the reality is that all too often, what that does is it continues to constrain you, even if it's subconsciously, to the fact that you are just a formerly incarcerated person.
Yeah.
And the reality is that if we want to move an entire country past seeing us as just formerly incarcerated people, then at some point we need to also liberate ourselves. I mean, to use a word that you had mentioned, Jeff, we have to liberate ourselves from this notion that we must, every time we speak, talk about our history of incarceration.
Yeah.
Because the reality is that, we have to show people that we can become more than that. And in your two cases, you guys are podcast hosts, business owners, advocates outside of being formally incarcerated.
Yeah. But Khalil, there's no question that when I get asked to speak, and I say, well, what do you, what would you like me to talk about? Their answer is almost always, oh, we want you to tell your story. So, so in a way, we have to negotiate with the outlets that allow us to have a voice, so that we give them a little bit of what they want, but we're still being embedded in the solution. And that's a tough. It's a tough thing to mediate sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, I've actually gotten to a point now where I tell people, look, I don't want to talk about me, right? Like if you're gonna invite me to a panel, and the panel is an hour, right? I don't want to do what most people will do with a panel, which is to talk for 58 minutes and try to squeeze in 2 minutes of questions and answers. I mean, I think it's disrespectful to the audience, because most people will use that time to talk about themselves in a way that doesn't highlight the systemic issues of the system.
Exactly.
Right? Like I could talk about how great my reentry was, but I returned to a major metropolitan city where non-for-profit services are a dime a dozen. I can talk very openly about my conviction. If I returned home 50 miles north of the city or 50 miles east of the city, that's an entirely different conversation.
Yeah.
Right? There are people who return home, as you know, all across this country, that don't talk about their incarceration because there is a level of stigma and shame associated with that.
For sure.
And there are family members that don't even know that they were incarcerated.
You know what?
Right?
Khalil, I served time with a couple of women who did not tell their families that they were at Danbury Federal Prison Camp. And I was like, what? How you do that?
Yeah.
And they had family members maintaining their residence and the whole thing.
Lynn told Skylar that I was on a business trip to Texas.
Well, that's what I told my kids. I kind of told my kids that too, because my kids were so little.
Well, she was 6 at the time, or 8, but
yeah.
So Khalil,
so you two have experience with exactly that issue, right? And so, how do you, kind of use your story to enter into spaces, but also not continue to tell your story in a way where it exceptionalizes you? It's tricky. Me personally, now I'm at a point in my career where I tell people, look, I don't want to talk very long about me.
Yeah.
Like, I want to talk about solutions. I want to talk about the systemic issues, because I actually feel that I've been given access to exceptional opportunities. And I don't want to continue to talk about that in a way, because most people, what they hear is, wow, Khalil is exceptional, or wow, Jeff is exceptional. And the reality is that I actually think that notion of exceptionalizing people is even more detrimental to the work than any policy, rule, or regulation that's on the books right now. Because the moment that we exceptionalize someone, they say, well, I like this person, but they just don't talk like so-and-so. Or, they're just not as polished as so and so. And the reality is, you point to any charismatic leader in this field, and I would point to you access to exceptional opportunities that they've had at some point in their story.
Absolutely.
I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
So how long ago were you incarcerated? I don't really know your story, Khalil. I know that you do this work and I see you and I'm proud of you, but I don't really know your story.
Yeah. So I served 6.5 years in New York State. I served from the years of 2003 to 2010, October 2003 to February of 2010. I had a robbery in the first conviction. I had myself and some childhood friends committed a robbery of two white women on 96th Street and Park Avenue. We were 4 kids from Southside Jamaica, Queens. We had firearms, and we robbed these 2 women in essentially one of the most wealthiest parts of New York City.
Sure.
And we were punished essentially for not necessarily what we did, but who we did our crime to.
Sure.
I believe strongly that had we robbed 2 women of color in the South Bronx or in South Jamaica, we would have not have received the sentences that we received. And ultimately, I was given an 11-year prison sentence.
Whoa!
I was 20 years old. First time involved in the criminal justice system. Was a high school graduate. Was employed at the time of my crime, and had a support from community members that I would say was a bit different than many people my age. I had people who I had volunteered with, people who knew me since I was a child, wrote letters for me. But yet and still, I was given an 11-year prison sentence, which was ultimately cut down to 8 years because of my appeal. And yes, I went into the system, not knowing that I was going to do 6.5. I was looking at a prison sentence that was more than half of the life that I had lived up until that point.
Yeah.
I received an 11-year prison sentence, as I said, and I was 20 years old. And so in New York State, as I would assume it is in most states and probably in the federal system, is, you're classified in terms of security level based on how much time you have been given.
Yeah.
And because I was given an 11-year prison sentence, I went to a maximum security prison.
Yeah.
And so here I was.
Well, what prison? What prison did you go to?
I ended up landing at Greenhaven Correctional Facility.
Oh yeah, I've been there. Did you have to go to the Welcome Center first in Fishkill?
No.
They have a building there called the Welcome Center.
Yeah. No. I was. Yeah. No, I didn't.
It's
always funny to me how bureaucratic systems find ways to point out their own hypocrisy. There's a welcome center in a prison for people.
The Welcome Center's a max, but they call it the Welcome Center.
Yeah. No, I in New York State, you get kind of, when you enter into the state system, you get funneled through 3 or 4 reception centers based on how much time you have, based on gender.
Yeah.
And so I went through Downstate Correctional Facility.
Yeah.
In 2004, and then ultimately stayed there for about 2 months, and then moved to Greenhaven. But still, I was a very young man. I was in a maximum security prison with an 11-year sentence. And although 11 years is quite lengthy, when you're in a maximum security prison, you're around people who have 25 years to life, people who have 50 years to life.
Yeah.
I mean, at one point, my neighbor, who was not that much older than me at the time, maybe about 2 or 3 years, he was serving a 999-year sentence.
What?
And and it's because New York State doesn't have natural life, but
and so they think that somebody could live to 900.
Exactly.
All right.
So so one thing you learn in a maximum security prison with 11-year prison sentence is you don't complain very much.
Yeah.
And because you will eventually have a shot. You'll have a chance to go home. And most people around you, if they do have a chance to go home, it won't be for much more lengthier time.
Yeah.
And so, I had to learn how to grapple with that. How do I, grapple with the reality of looking at an 11-year prison sentence, but also, not being able to vent that frustration to people who were gonna, barring any unforeseen circumstances, were going to die in prison
Mm-hmm.
based on their prison sentence that they were serving.
Mhm.
And I went into the system not really knowing what to do. I was, unbeknownst to me at the time, Greenhaven has a very lengthy history of programs that are designed and implemented and facilitated and ran by men who were incarcerated at that facility.
Mhm.
And so the state system has its requirements in terms of quote unquote programs. So they're called mandated state programs. And then there are what they call volunteer programs. And these are the programs that I'm talking about. Programs like the Youth Assistance Program, programs like the Alternatives to Violence Project, Prisoners for AIDS Counseling and Education. I just kind of got involved in those programs because I didn't, I wanted to stay busy. And the people that were around me, who were the elders of the facility, saw me as a very young man and knew the options that were available to me in prison. And, just basically said, look, why don't you come down to this program and just stay busy? You have, a pretty, lengthy sentence in front of you, but you still have an opportunity to go home, and why not prepare yourself?
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, I didn't understand it. I was just like, man, whatever. Like I just want to stay as busy as possible to make this time go by as fast as possible.
Yeah.
And before you know it, one program led to a next, and then ultimately I ended up getting into a college program at Greenhaven.
Mhm.
And it was in this college program studying theology for a year that completely transformed the way that I saw myself, the way that I saw my role as a young man in this world, let alone in prison and let alone in the community. Just saw it gave me a different lens to see my role as a community member, as a son, as a soon-to-be husband and father, and it really dramatically changed my perception of the opportunity in front of me, and that opportunity being that if I was going to leave prison, that I would be leaving prison as equipped as I could be to not go back, because I was a very early convert in not wanting to go back to prison. I was like, I totally don't ever want to come back here.
I remember everyone
and so I
says
was
that
gonna do
though,
everything
right?
I could.
Khalil, everyone that leaves prison is like, I am not coming back here. And then something, I don't know, something shifts, something happens. Maybe there's no supports in place, but recidivism is a real thing.
Yeah. Well, if you're going to go back to the street corner because that's what because you don't have a job or you don't have a place to live or there's no support, people get back into trouble.
But I'm interested, Khalil, in you said that and you didn't go back. So what made the difference to you? Like, what was the thing that said, "Oh no, I'm not going back, and I'm gonna move in this direction"?
Yeah. Well, so I agree with you, right? Like there are people that I believe wholeheartedly that the moment that every single person walks out of a jail cell, prison cell, immigration detention cell, whatever it is, the moment they leave that place, I believe in their heart that they genuinely do not want to go back. The problem is that the further we move away from that moment, and the more barriers that a person comes up against, and the more temptation that a person comes up against, it makes that moment much more difficult to forget or much more difficult to bury. Because some people don't forget it; they just bury it really good. And so that's what I think is the problem, right? And speaking to your point, Jeff, is that lack of access to opportunity. And so speaking directly to your question, Babs, is that I had access to opportunity, right? I keep saying that I was a person who returned to a major metropolitan city. That made a huge difference. I mean, I didn't have to worry about, where can I go to get help? There were, at least half a dozen organizations that I knew of that serviced people like me I knew of those organizations even when I was incarcerated,
Mm-hmm.
had wrote to some of those organizations and were told to just basically come in when I got home. And now, again, if you're looking at reentry for someone who is returning to a much more rural part of this country, those opportunities are less likely. I returned to a mother who welcomed me with open arms and said, look, you can stay here as long as you need to. Just get yourself stable. I was able to be guided by other formerly incarcerated people because they were able to talk about their incarceration very openly. And those are all opportunities that I had access to that helped to stabilize me. I mean, I say all the time that, I came home in February. I walked into the Fortune Society in March, and there was nothing but formerly incarcerated people there. And so they dramatically helped me to shape and formulate the mold that was in my mind of what was really possible for a formerly incarcerated person.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And they had executives there who were formerly incarcerated. I hadn't even thought about, anything like that. People were doing policy work. People like Glenn and people like Glenn Martin, Stanley Richards, Velma Donovan. These are all people that I met who were talking very openly about their incarceration, not in a way to glorify it, but to say that, look, I know what that means when you say that you just came home. You don't have to explain to me. I get it. And it was walking into those programs that actually helped me to really shift and understand what was possible for me after my incarceration. So I would say that that's one of the major things, was having access to those programs, but also the fact that those programs were staffed by formerly incarcerated people and led by formerly incarcerated people.
But Khalil, but also coming back to New York, you have a certain amount of anonymity walking around in the street. I mean, no one knows if you've been to prison or you haven't. If you're going into the supermarket, but in a rural area, you're branded.
Or a smaller town or a smaller city.
Exactly.
That makes all the difference. So, all right. So you're a married man and a father.
Mm-hmm.
How long you been married?
Oh wow, my wife and I
get the right answer here, Khalil. Get the right answer.
Yeah. We first got married in 2005, I want to say. And this was, again, keep in mind, I went into the system in 2003. So we married very young into my incarceration when, I hadn't matured as much as I am now.
Sure.
And didn't even have the skills, quite honestly, to be a husband, let alone to be a husband behind bars. And so, we separated, went our different ways, and then rekindled our relationship in 2010 after I came home.
Wow.
Okay.
So we've been but we've known each other since, now going on 15, 16 years. And so you talk about, people who have been on a journey with each other, quite literally. And we haven't even talked about immigration as yet, but, just, the 6.5 years of us having separate time apart really did help us to kind of understand how much we actually wanted and needed each other after my incarceration.
So what's your wife and kid's name? You can do a shout out here.
Yeah. My wife is Chamika, and we have 3 girls.
Wow.
Mia, Ayana, and Caitlin.
Lovely.
Is your wife of Caribbean descent or African descent?
She is. Yeah, she is. Yeah, her family is Jamaican. She was born in the U.S.
And so you mentioned the immigration piece. Is she an immigrant, or is she naturalized, or what is?
No, she was born here. But I was referring to my 5.5-month stint in immigration detention.
Yeah.
Which happened in 2014. So I came home in 2010. Had been home for 4 years. Successfully completed parole without incident. Was working pretty much the whole time that I had, from the moment I walked out of prison, pretty much the whole time. Paying taxes, community member, advocate, was helping people get into college. I was working at an organization called College Initiative. was 1 week away from a master's. So within those 4 years, I finished my undergrad in 2 years, went right into a master's program, and was 1 week away from my master's, completing that master's degree program, when Immigration Customs Enforcement, commonly and regularly referred to as ICE, came to my home and arrested me, essentially, um, for two reasons, and two reasons alone. One was the fact that I had a criminal conviction, and two was the fact that I was not a naturalized citizen. My mother and I came here when I was 4 years old from our native country of Guyana in South America. And I lived here my whole life. We came here as legal permanent residents. I grew up in the U.S. I grew up in Queens in specific, and so for me, I consider myself to be an American. As much as I acknowledge my Guyanese heritage, the reality is that if I was deported back to Guyana right now, I would not be welcomed as a Guyanese citizen. I'd be very much welcomed as an American who just so happens to have been born in Guyana. And they were their sole goal was to deport me. And this was underneath the Obama administration. People have a lot to say about the current administration in terms of immigration policy, but lest we not forget that the previous administration built the machine that the current administration is wielding.
That was built by the previous administration. This has been a long-standing policy.
Yeah. I mean, people refer to the 1994 crime bill pretty frequently to talk about the kind of explosion, the incentivized explosion of mass incarceration. But the reality is that in 1996, when they overhauled the immigration system underneath the same president, Clinton, it also was the advent of the explosion of mass deportation, mass detention.
Yes.
Because what that bill did was it dramatically expanded the crimes in which a person could be detained and deported. And so what we're seeing now in terms of mass incarceration, we can link back to Clinton, but what we're seeing now in terms of mass detention, mass deportation, we can also link back to Clinton.
So how long did they hold you?
They held me for 5.5 months. It was at the point in my life where not only was I 1 week away from a master's, but at this point we had, my wife and I were living we were living on our own. We were a young married couple. We had 2 young children. I was the provider of the household. My mother had a stroke the year prior, and so there was a lot that we were balancing that kind of rested on my plate. And so when you remove that equation, when you remove that piece of the equation, it caused all types of chaos in our life. I mean, I have my story on how that went, but think about my wife, right? She wakes up one morning, she's in a 2-parent household. By the end of the day, she's a single parent. And very much to your point, Jeff and Babs, my wife told our kids at the time, who were 6 and 2, that Daddy had to go on a business trip, right? Because as a 6 and 2-year-old, the world is very much black and white.
Yeah.
You don't want to insert that shade of gray at a very young age. And so, for them, it was a choice for me to leave. And so every time I spoke to them, especially the youngest one, because it was a choice for me to leave, they, as children do, right, very innocently said, well, when are you going to choose to come back? And so every time that I was talking to them, they would always ask, when are you coming home? When are you coming home? Right? And it was because of a huge advocacy effort on my behalf that was led by my wife and many others, that I was able to win my release from immigration detention. And it was because in the 4 years that I had been home, all of the people that I had met were advocates. They were activists. They were organizers. They were people that worked in policy, elected officials. And so when they heard of this, look, someone who had been home 4 years, positively contributing to society, and now you take him away from his family, from our society, from our community, why? And the central question was, how much punishment is really enough for one person? And the government
agreed and said, you know what? Although you are on the top of the list of who we are detaining and deporting, we don't want to deport you. And they released me in October of 2014 after 5.5 months of detention. But I will say, like, even to this day, my wife and I think about that very vividly. We think about this time of year very vividly. I was in immigration detention from May of 2014 to October of 2014, and so I always say, like, this time 5 years ago, I was in immigration detention.
Wow.
Right? And not really knowing what was going to happen. I mean, we were preparing ourselves that I would be deported. I mean, literally, the release of me from immigration detention, it was a shock to everyone. I mean, I wasn't told that I was going to be released. I was just told one morning to pack up all my stuff.
Yeah, sure.
They brought me to the courthouse and released me from the courthouse.
So Khalil, were you in immigration detention when Just Leadership had that first event at the Tribeca rooftop in 2014? Were you not at that event because you were?
I think I was.
Oh, so
I think I was. Yeah.
It was right after you got out.
It was literally right after I got out.
Yeah.
I mean, I got out in October, and as you know, non-for-profit business, the end of the year is always when everyone is having their gala, their fundraiser, or something. And I mean, when I say it was a huge advocacy effort, I am quite literally not doing it any justice. I mean, people fought for me daily, and especially people at an organization called Immigrant Defense Project, where they literally lived and breathed this case.
Mm-hmm.
And people like Glenn and others were involved in some shape, form, or fashion. And so when I got out, I mean, it was literally just a whirlwind of events and thank yous and meetings and phone calls with people, some of which I still have never met to this day. People who never met me, had never heard of me, but had heard of my case and said, wow, that is insane, and just called someone and just sent an email or just signed a petition. People donated money who had never heard of me a day in their life, but it just, again, asked themselves, how much punishment is really enough for one person in a country where we say we believe in the ability for someone to have redemption.
So you're in a unique position because you get to speak to mass incarceration and this immigration foolishness that's going on right now. So you are in both worlds. I mean, you could speak to both things. And from what we see on the news, and I have friends who are running organizations that are providing legal assistance to folks who are on the border as we speak. You're in a unique position to sort of talk about what that looks like and how harrowing that is to a family, as well as mass incarceration. Like, that's an interesting place to be in.
Yeah.
Not one that you choose, but it is what it is.
Yeah. It's interesting in the fact that, I say all the time that I've survived both mass incarceration and mass deportation. And the reality is that, unfortunately, we don't see all too often the clear intersectionality of both of these issues.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I say all the time that if we were to solve mass incarceration today, if we were to figure out a way to completely decimate and revamp the current criminal justice system that we have, we would still have mass deportations. We would still have global climate issues, right? Like, all of these issues are interconnected.
Yes.
And we have to understand that. And as criminal justice advocates, we have to do better with how we highlight other social justice issues. And as immigrant rights folks, we have to do better in how we highlight other social justice issues, because, the reality is one day mass incarceration will end. Like, I believe that wholeheartedly, that one day we will reach a point where this country does not struggle with mass incarceration anymore. But if we don't do it in a way that builds momentum to address other social justice issues or simultaneously address other social justice issues, we're going to be back in the same place with another issue.
Yeah.
It's going to be called a different thing. And the reality is that we'll continue to keep fighting oppression. And that is the ultimate common enemy here is this need for certain people to consistently find ways to oppress other people. That's the key underlying issue in all of the social justice issue this country is facing.
Yeah, well, people don't know that every bed is full. You know, it's not like our prison system. We release 4,000 people from our Federal Bureau of Prisons. They're replaced within 2 hours of people with an A in front of their number in their immigration detention clients. So these beds are full. It's not like it's not like there's any room at the inn.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, when Eric Holder was Attorney General, he instructed his staff to do a scouring of the country to find policies, rules, and regulations that allowed for legal discrimination against people who had criminal convictions, not felony convictions, any form of a criminal conviction, misdemeanor included. And they came back with more than 44,000 policies, rules, and regulations on the books that allow for people to be legally discriminated against simply and solely because they have a criminal conviction. That in and of itself is the problem. That right there, right? That no matter how well you do, right? No matter, like Khalil Cumberbatch, when I'm applying for certain things, when I want to do certain things, I still have to disclose that I have a criminal conviction.
Yes.
And that is for someone who has resources available to them, who has access to opportunity, who has a network that I can tap into. That's me. And can you imagine the person that doesn't have all of that?
I say that all the time, Khalil.
Who is ashamed.
I say that all the time when I step into these spaces because I know the access and the privilege that I get to enjoy and have. Whereas I know sisters coming out don't have that same. You know, when I went to prison, I had a whole community holding me down, an entire community, a church family. I had all of that. And I know sisters that are coming out who, you know, bridges are burned, families are destroyed, and there's no left or right to go, right? So I get it. I get that, and I see it and feel it in every space that I walk in. So I understand that truly. So we have a few more minutes left, and I want to ask you, what are you most hopeful about these days? I mean, this work is heavy work. Like this is heavy work. You take 20 steps forward and 2,000 steps backwards.
Yeah. So I always talk about, you know, the need to dramatically change the perception of who it is that we are talking about when we say the criminal justice system, or when we say jails and prisons, or even immigration detention, juvenile justice centers. Most people, when they hear that term, they think they have negative connotation. They have negative perception of who it is that we're talking about. Most people across this country. And the struggle is that even if we, you know, were to write all of those 44,000 policies, rules, and regulations, the biggest barrier is the negative perception. One of the ways that we've seen from other social justice issues, other social justice fights, is that if that perception is dramatically shifted, then it is easy for people to then get housing, to get employment, for people to talk openly about their experience. I mean, if we look at HIV and AIDS, that is one example of how people have been able to, you know, 20, 30 years ago, were not able to even receive medical care, let alone talk about being HIV positive. Now it is, you know, it's common for someone to say, yeah, I'm HIV positive. That doesn't define me. And it's even more common for someone to say, well, I'm not going to hire you just because you're HIV positive, right? And so we have to get to that point with mass incarceration. What inspires me now, what I find inspiration in, is how more and more media, how more and more Hollywood and other forms of mainstream pop culture are starting to talk about this issue in the same ways that we talk about it. And when we see, for example, Ava DuVernay do an entire series called When They See Us, and that get national attention the way that it did, that's changing perception. When we see a movie coming out about Brian Banks, who was a formerly incarcerated, wrongfully convicted man,
Mm-hmm.
and talk about his story, when we see another story coming out about Just Mercy
Mm-hmm.
and Brian Stevenson's work,
Mhm.
like that is how we are going to change the perception. And so that inspires me. However, it also at the same time worries me, because the moment that Hollywood is no longer interested, the moment that they make one movie and it flops and it doesn't do what they want it to, because it's a business in the end, right? They're not doing it because they're trying to change hearts and minds. They're doing it to make money. But the moment that they pull out, if we don't continue the momentum, then it's all for naught. And I worry about that. Simultaneously, it also inspires me to see that we've built a momentum to the point where people have to now pay attention to the issues that we're talking about.
I think you're right.
Yep.
We've got some good people out there. I mean, I think Van Jones is doing some decent work out there. I think Mr. Martin is still doing good work out there. Of course, Ms. Topeka is out there stomping these social justice streets, and you and quite a few other people.
And our local friend Lewis Reed, who's been on the show a couple of times, and a Just Leadership alumni.
That's what I mean. All these Just Leadership people are out here stomping these streets.
I would say 30% of our guests were Just Leadership people. So Khalil, we got a few more minutes left. Why don't you just touch your current work, how people can contact you, if you accept donations, tell how that happens. Just go for it.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So New Yorkers United for Justice, you can learn more about our work at nyuj.org. That's nyuj.org. We currently have a clemency campaign here in New York State to push our Governor Cuomo, to issue more clemencies and commutations and pardons. So you can learn more about that on our website. You can follow me on social media. It's Khalil Cumberbatch, Khalil, Cumberbatch, Cumberbatch. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. You can also check out my personal website at KhalilCumberbatch.com. You can email me at Khalil, Khalil, at nyuj.org.
And
very nice.
And
thank you, Jeff,
and
for the opportunity.
And you have some new
included in those people doing great work, I would include you too, because you're providing an opportunity for people to talk about not only their personal stories, but also talk about systemic issues. So thank you.
Oh, thank you for being our guest.
Yeah,
today.
Khalil, we're a big fan of yours for a long time. You know that, and you're a gentleman. You know, you're someone who I'm proud to be associated with as having come through the justice system, and we walk erect. You know, we're proud people who've come through.
Well, with that note, friend, because Khalil means friend, and
there you go.
in Arabic, right? So with that said, it has been a pleasure talking to you, and we want you to come back again so you can follow up and tell us what's going on and what's happening next.
Yeah, please, I would love to.
Lovely.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of the weekend.
You too as well.
Yeah.
Thank you, Harry Droz. I'm gonna play us out.
Thanks, Harry.
Jeff, thank you very much for a great show.
First show of season 3 in the books.
It's done. We're done, baby.
Yep.
And we're back. Our next show is September 20th. And we have who do we have next?
Aaron Kinzel, who a system-impacted person who teaches at the University of Michigan at Dearborn, and he's doing great work out there. And as we kind of spread a little bit of the national focus of the show, we're bringing in some people from all over the country as well as local Connecticut issues.
All right. Well, that's us. Thank you, Andrew Kaplan.
Thank you, Lynn Springer, and love you, Babs.
And thank you to the Community Foundation of Greater New Haven.
Now more than ever.
We out.
Yeah, we're out.